Okay, so we start afresh. So again, my name is Ken Harvey. This is Success Strategies. What I started to say is not only, because you may have trouble pronouncing my family name, as others have in other places where I've worked. Dr. Ken is fine, but I'm also consider myself more of a professional than a professor. I've been a newspaper editor and publisher for many years, and also in PR marketing. And I've kind of flirted back and forth with academia, so I have accumulated about 18 years of academic work over the years. But I still consider myself first and foremost a professional rather than a professor. And I even approach my academic work that way because I think, unlike a lot of professors and a lot of accrediting agencies and a lot of administrators, I think we in essence make two promises kind of unwritten promises to people. And I think sometimes universities don't respect those promises adequately. The first promise is, in essence, that if you come to our university and study hard and pass our classes, you will be ready for the real world. And I've surveyed thousands of media executives specifically, since that's my field. I'm in communications, and they're saying, no, that's not true. You haven't prepared our people for our future employees for the real world. And so I've taken more of a professional tack to my academics because I want to fulfill that contract. At least in my classes, I want to fulfill the contract to the employers that I'm going to prepare you for the real world. I don't want you to have to do, for example, a lot of memorizing. I use quizzes mostly to give you incentive to pay attention. But I would rather not even give you a grade if I could. I think some radical educators say there should only be 2 grades. One is you pass or you don't pass. And if you don't pass, you keep on learning until you pass. You either have to learn the material or you don't learn the material. If you don't learn the material, you shouldn't go on to something else. So you should stay in the class until you learn the material. And with modern technology, that's very possible. I can video record all my lectures. I can put all my material online, and if you don't pass, then you just keep going back and you keep going through the material on our Moodle website, our e-learning system, until you do pass. At the same time, a lot of our courses, I think, do not do hardly anything to prepare you for the future. They're pretty much wasted time. I have a class right now that is a history of media. I think that's wasted time as a topic for preparing you for the future. And so mostly in the class, I also have students do presentations. I have them write reports on a regular basis as if they were reporters. They report on what's going on at the conference. I have them busy doing stuff, preparing for their future, because the history of media does not prepare them for their future. And so I'm kind of a renegade that way. This class, I do not want to be a waste of anybody's time, including mine. I think this may be one of the most important classes you take, because this class will help you plan and determine your own future and help you set strategies to be successful in achieving those. You can be successful no matter what the university does to you. If you know where you're going and you use the tools that are available from the university. Even if you think some of those classes are not worth your taking, you can still use them or use your time here well in preparing yourself for the future. There's plenty here to help you do that. But you need to know where you're going. And you need to know how to focus and where to focus. And we'll talk a lot about that in momentarily. A little bit more about the other thing I was going to say then, because I consider myself a professional, not a professor, I allow students to just call me Ken. Because if I were to go into a newsroom and I would say, hello, I'm your new editor, you can call me Dr. Ken, they would probably throw me out the window. You don't do that in a professional setting, in a newspaper, in a magazine. And in fact, I've done research. Part of my research, I asked executives if you could choose, and when you're hiring, if you could choose between hiring somebody with a master's degree or a doctorate, everything else being equal, which one would you hire? And the vast majority said want a master's degree. They do not want somebody with a PhD in their organization. There is a bias against anybody with the highest degree in the area in the field of communication, because people with a doctorate degree have forgotten how to communicate in large part. I don't think I have, but a lot of them have, because they're too busy trying to sound smart. And that's one of the first things I teach all my students as far as communicating, is don't try to sound smart. Just try to sound clear. Just make your content smart. Make your words clear. And you'll be more successful. And that's something that I had to learn as a student in order to become a good writer. So, anyway, my background, as I said, is in communications. 25 years in journalism as a publisher and editor, as well as a reporter. 18 years in teaching in higher education, 7 years in migrant bilingual education, 7 years as a corporate marketing PR director, 4 years as a government official, 1 year in broadcasting, 5 years in book publishing, 20 years in web creation and management, but I'm not really 100 years old. I'm a workaholic, and I usually do 2 things at once. And I probably could add some years to that, because sometimes I do 3 things at once. And so I'm, the last few years, for example, I was the editor and co-author of 6 books in Kazakhstan about the best practices of NGOs. That's not really reflected up there. I could probably, so when I said 5 years in book publishing, it's a lot longer than that. I've been book publishing for probably 10 years. But anyway, my point is I have a very broad background that I can share with you. A lot of it has to do with, I can relate to success strategies, how to be successful in your field. And it's not, if you're in engineering, let's say. My PR marketing was largely with engineering firms. And independently, I worked for two different companies at different times. And independently, both CEOs came to me and said, Ken, I wish I had taken more communication courses. My engineering skills are expected and important. But what leads to success in engineering is not engineering skills, it's communication. I will emphasize communications. I'd say that's probably the second most important thing to your success in life. There's one more important, and we'll go over that in a second. But at least the second most important thing in your success in life is communication. And so I'm going to have you involved in communications. I'm not going to grade you real harshly on your ability to communicate. But sometimes it's just you have to. In fact, one of my surveys, I asked executives, media executives, and communication executives, how do we teach our students how to be better communicators or better writers in some cases? And they said, have them write some more. Or I would expand that, have them communicate some more. One professor told a colleague of mine that you have to write 1 million words before you become a good writer. And that's true with all communications. You just have to do it. I've done research on that also, and it doesn't depend as totally as much on your feedback and your instruction. Totally, that's important. Sometimes just doing it. It's also helpful to read a lot to be a good communicator, because you then kind of absorb how good writers are writing, for example. I remember CEO of Alibaba says he gets his inspiration by movies, listening to very powerful movies and hearing how they communicate. And he tries to mimic, to some degree, great parts of movies in his communication. So just very quickly, this was a bilingual newspaper I published for 7 years, English and Spanish. This was a weekly newspaper that I was the editor and publisher and main writer for. took more of a magazine approach, kind of like the Star does, not a traditional front page. Entertainment magazine, I was publisher, editor, and writer for. Blog site that I still operate, not as much, I need to do more on it, but it's a blog site I do. It also includes, because I think a lot of Americans specifically don't pay enough attention to both sides of the story, so to speak. I have liberal news sources on the left, conservative news sources on the right, and I encourage people to read both of them so they understand both sides of the issues. And those are RSS feeds that generate themselves. Book publishing I mentioned. This is a couple of the books that I co-edited, co-authored, and published in Kazakhstan about best practices of NGOs. You see it was in bilingual also, English and Russian. This is a book that just came out last year that I co-authored with another, the editor was a professor here who's now gone. But this is about the impact of web and mobile technologies on everything. That also makes me relevant to whatever your major is, because web and mobile technologies are going to impact everybody in the entire society and the entire economy. And so I wrote 7 chapters of that book relating to marketing and branding and PR and news media and education and business in general. This is an online TV channel that I created. I won't go into all the background of that, why I did that. Anyway, again, working with NGOs was part of the project. I still have it. I still maintain these websites. I do a lot of educational videos. This is one on marketing. That is, anyway, again, about online marketing. So anyway, I do a lot of those. These are materials that I created for the engineering firm. When we propose to do the consulting engineering design work for a $100 million project or something, it was a lot of money to the company, and so they don't just send a brochure. This book on the left was probably the front cover of a book that was probably 100 pages long that I had to create specifically for that organization we were trying to get a contract from, to show them all of our background of why they should hire us. The second one is more of a brochure that I created for them. Also did a lot of marketing and did some marketing in politics. Actually, the one on the left was mine, me from a long time ago. And I was elected easily in the city council of our city. On the right, I ran the campaign for mayoral candidate in Tampa, Florida, and got high praise for my work with that. So anyway, that's just a quick review of what I've done. I want to talk a little bit about my philosophy of education. Based on some of the writing and analysis, some of the great thinkers of our time, I've kind of come to the conclusion that our brains, our minds, are kind of like a kind of a game or something that used to be made for children. It was called an erector set. When I was a kid, these were available, and it was just a bunch of metal strips, largely a bunch of metal strips with holes in them, and a bunch of bolts and nuts. And you'd piece them together and create Eiffel Towers, skyscrapers or whatever, just bolting all these little pieces. Some would be long, some would be short, different sizes, and you piece them together and build beautiful things. One of the reasons why probably none of you remember when you were 2 or 3 years old, some of you may remember when you were 4 years old, is that your conceptual framework wasn't built in your mind yet. You didn't have anything to associate with. You didn't have things to stick together that you can still remember. Our memory is to a large degree based on how we build this conceptual framework. The conceptual framework is extremely useful to us in building our memory, but it also can be detrimental to us as well. Because the way we build our, a lot of our conceptual framework is built based on what our parents tell us, our teachers tell us, and we kind of create for ourselves a paradigm of what our world's all about. And my world is not the same as your world. Is mine right? I'm sure it's not. Is yours right? I'm sure it's not. Your paradigm and my paradigm are problematic in that they shape the way we see the world. Just a quick example of that, if I say dog, or dog, you picture a dog in your mind. How many of you see a big, ferocious dog when I say dog? How many see that? How many see a little tiny, cuddly dog? The dog one of you sees is not the same dog that somebody else sees. If you've ever been bitten by a dog, you may be seeing in your mind the big, ferocious dog. If you have a little puppy at home that you like to play with, you're seeing that little puppy in your mind. Well, it's kind of the same thing with any concept. The concept we see it differently. If I say church, you're going to see that word in your mind differently than I see in mine, because we're from different religious backgrounds and so forth. So our concepts, our conceptual framework are so different, and they become restrictive. So one of the things that one of the thinkers that kind of led me to this conclusion mentioned was that in science there are every so often scientific revolutions, when suddenly the entire paradigm we have about a certain area of science is totally changed. One thing he noted is it's almost never changed by old people. Almost never. The revolution is almost always led by a young person. Why do you suppose that is? Why are the young people the ones who lead? The older people know more, they've experienced more, they've read more, they've done more research, but it's the young people that lead the revolution. Why do they lead these scientific revolutions of history, do you suppose? Thoughts? What do you think? Why would it be young people who lead the revolution in science? Where you think, gee, that's factual. Science is that's truth. Science, right? That's not what it is. It's a paradigm that we see reality through the theories of science, and they sometimes change radically. But they change usually by young people, not old people. And it's because of this. It's because the older people, they may know more, they may have experienced more, they may have written more, but they are now stuck into a paradigm. They're stuck into a conceptual framework that does not allow them to consider something that is radically different. And so it's the young people that have to do it. They're the ones that have to lead the revolution in almost every case. So, understanding how our minds work, sometimes you have to work on your own mind to force your mind, as I was showing in my blog site. Why do I put news from the liberal media and news from the conservative media on my blog site? Because too many people only listen to the news they want to hear. And so the conservatives in America think the liberals are idiots. The liberals in America think the conservatives are idiots. And we have a very disturbing situation in America that could be one of the main reasons why that country could collapse in a very, very serious way, socially, economically, is that it has a very polarized population now. And those that would like to see America collapse actually have tried to foment that. There's just a news story out yesterday that Russia, there's a movement in America called Black Lives Matter, and it's come to a head right now even in sports, where the athletes headed by the black athletes are refusing to stand for the national anthem at the start of a ball game. And the conservatives saying, you guys are a bunch of bunch of lame brains, if you would. You do not appreciate what America has done for you. Whatever color you are, you do not appreciate what America did for you. America was one of the first countries that did free the slaves. America was like one of the first countries that did use kind of reverse discrimination in a way to help the blacks to progress in economics. It provides all sorts of benefits for them to help them to succeed if they are willing to work hard to succeed. So the conservatives are very upset with these black athletes that are refusing to honor the flag and honor the country. And so that's when it gets into football, that shows just how polarized the country is right now. But anyway, the news that I was talking about is that Russia bought a whole bunch of Facebook ads to try to promote Black Lives Matter, the group that wants to dishonor the flag and dishonor the heritage of America and trying to cause problems. So those that would like to see America fail they like this. They want to see it polarized and everybody at each other's throats. Anyway, so when we get something, we face something that we don't understand, and it doesn't fit into our conceptual framework, it's like a big metal piece that just does not fit any place. You know, we've already have a construction like one of these, and suddenly here comes a big, long piece of metal with holes in it. We might be able to handle small pieces, but that big piece just does not fit. And so we throw it away and say, that's nonsense. That's irrelevant to my conceptual framework. It doesn't fit in. And so when somebody challenges us with big ideas, our paradigm prohibits us from fully considering it. They did an experiment with college students, people your age, maybe a little bit older, and they presented some radical new ideas that actually were scientific based, but ideas that they had not learned yet. They presented some radical new ideas to college kids, to university kids, and then they tested them to see how well they remembered and understood what was taught them. What was strange about it was that the smartest kids did the worst because they already had a conceptual framework. The smart kids do all this extra work and they build their conceptual framework. They understand the world based on what they read, based on their professors, and now they're presenting something revolutionary. They can't handle it. They throw it out as nonsense. The kids who were more the B and C students, they understood it and remembered it better because they know they did not have their conceptual framework was not quite as strong, was not quite as rigid. The older you get, the more rigid your conceptual framework becomes. So one of the things I want to do is open your minds to the possibilities, help you make some paradigm shifts, to see things a little bit differently, and to challenge you to open your own minds, open to understand how your mind itself may limit your understanding of different things, whether in any place, whether it's other people's religion, other people's politics, revolutionary ideas in science, whatever it is, you need to understand that you can't trust your mind totally. Your mind is invaluable. That separates us from the animals, is what we can do, what our minds can do for us. But they also limit us. They're also fallible. They're not perfect. In education, in building that conceptual framework, I try to take advantage of that. In my experiments and experiments of others, what we found, for example, if you just sit there and listen to a lecture, you'll remember about 70% of it in 3 hours, but you're only going to remember about 10% in 3 days. It just doesn't stick. You haven't done anything to help it stick into your conceptual framework. You haven't done any work with it. If you learn from a demonstration, you'll remember 72% of it because now you're visually understanding it, not just, and so your visual learning is a little bit stronger, and you'll remember 20% of it in 3 days. If you combine the two and you have a demonstration and a full explanation of it, now those combined, now you'll remember 85% in 3 hours and 65% in 3 days. That's good. But if you actually do it, if you write about it, you have to go through the effort of analyzing information, synthesizing information, communicating information, or whether it's in writing or in speech. Now suddenly you'll remember 100% in 3 hours, but in 3 days you may remember about 85%, And the question that one of the experiments I'd like to run is goes to the next question: how much will you remember in 3 years? I think when you actually are involved in your learning, when you're having to not just read material but analyze it, synthesize it, express it, that sticks long term. Whereas if you're just doing preparing for quizzes, that's short term. I've already run some experiments and shown that was true. But those were still short-term experiments. I want to do long-term experiments. But let me get to, so in the class I do want to, even if it's a large class, I want to have you guys involved. Everybody will do a presentation to the class. Everybody's going to do some writing. The writing will not be, a lot of the writing will be about how what we learn in this class relates to you. And so there's not going to be a right or wrong to your writing. In fact, I'm also going to pretty much ignore your spelling and grammar as long as I can understand it. What I really, about your writing for this class will be basically, did you put in the effort to think about what we're talking about and apply it in your own lives? Have you thought about how these principles can be applied and help you be more successful in life? So my grading of it, first off, as long as you make any effort at all, you're not going to get a bad grade on it, because there's no right or wrong answer. And I'm not grading you on your writing ability. So mainly I want to see, did you make the effort? So everybody get an A in that part of the course. It may not be easy in the sense you may have to wrestle with it a little bit. You may learn something and you may wrestle with, how do I apply this in my life? How can this help me be successful? So it may take you longer than you think, but it may not be when you're just sitting there. You may, like me, I like to go out and walk the track every night. I try to walk about 10 kilometers every day. So during that 10 kilometers, if I were you, I'd be thinking about, let me see, how do I apply these principles in my life? And then I go back home and I write down my ideas. And so you may be thinking about it during times that, while you're eating, while you're, when you have some time, you're going to be thinking about what we talked about in class. And so the writing of it won't take long. The thinking of it may take a while, because it's all about you. How do you apply these principles in your life? And that's harder in some ways than if there's just a right or wrong answer that I'm asking you for. In this class, or in all classes, I want you to understand my priorities. And this also relates to our subject. And that is, first off, there's almost no correlation between GPA and success in life. Almost none. Almost zero correlation. In fact, in some cases, they found negative correlations between success in the classroom and success in real life. For example, at Harvard, this was a narrow study. At Harvard, they examined the success of their students that were on scholarship there, and what they found was those who had perfect grades were not nearly as successful as those who had lower grades, but who were maybe working part-time, involved with clubs, doing stuff outside of the classroom. Those were the ones who actually succeeded in life, not the ones with a perfect GPA. So in that case, it's the reverse. With that narrow spectrum of those on scholarship, that it actually has a negative correlation, not a positive correlation with GPA. I remember, I like to talk about two of my friends in high school. I had one friend who had a perfect GPA, never got anything less than an A. Very smart, very committed to his studies. I had another friend who probably never got above a C. And I think even a C was generous for him. He did not care about school. He did not care about his ability to communicate at the time. He did not care about math. He did not care about the things that you have to remember in school. He probably, in a lot of his classes, they just passed him to get rid of him. He was what they call a social promotion. Not because he passed the coursework, but because they just wanted to get rid of him, basically. So about as far apart as you can be in the spectrum, Alan, the smartest kid in class, by GPA anyway, and Dennis, the stupidest kid in class by GPA. later on, however, after graduation, Alan didn't know what he wanted to do in life. He's a deep thinker. And he didn't know what he wanted to do. What was success to him? One of the questions we'll talk about in this class. What is success? What is my life all about? And so he drove truck for a few years. He became a driver of one of these big rigs with, that tows the long trailers and stuff. He just drove truck because he wanted to think about it. And so he thought and he thought and he thought. And finally he decided he didn't want to be a scientist. He didn't want to be a professor. He wanted to work in a prison and help prisoners to come out of prison and not come back again, to turn their lives around. And so Alan is a counselor in a prison. That's his idea of success. And I think it's a noble pursuit. He could have been anything. He's a counselor in a prison. The other friend, Dennis, loved one thing in life. One thing. Mechanics. He loved mechanics. And so he became a master mechanic. Ironically, he became a college instructor of mechanics. So the stupidest kid in class became a college instructor. The smartest kid in class went to prison. Well, for noble reasons, but he went to prison, right? So which one was successful? It's totally on their definition, but I think they were both successful. They both did what they wanted to do. Which one do you think I admire more? Dennis. I admire both of them. Don't get me wrong. I admire both of them. But I admire Dennis because for 12 years in the American public school system, he was told he was an idiot. You're an idiot, Dennis. You're an idiot. You're an idiot. You can't do anything. We're just getting rid of you because you're so stupid. And he became a college instructor. That I admire. I admire because he did not allow the label that teachers put on him to destroy his future. That resistance to being labeled is extremely admirable in my book because it's hard for us to do. We frequently see ourselves the way people around us see us and the feedback they give to us. And if they treat us like we're stupid, we feel stupid. I don't know how in the world Dennis did what he did. I don't know how in the world he overcame 12 years of negative input and became a college instructor. I don't know how he did it. I admire Alan because he chose not to pursue something that would give him glory, so to speak. He did something that would help other people. And that was his idea of success, and I admire him for that. So, again, if you try to analyze these two lives on the success scale, which one was successful? It did not relate to GPA. They were both successful, and in some ways you might say Dennis may have been more successful by the world's definition, the stupid one. You know that a lot of the billionaires in the world now never finished the universities. So obviously that has a negative correlation. There's about, in this new age, the technology billionaires, like I said, a good share of them never finished university. That didn't mean they stopped learning. There's a difference between learning and getting a degree. And we'll talk about that a little bit more too. I mentioned already the importance of communications and why I want you to be involved in this class intellectually, not just listening, not just trying to pass a quiz or an exam, because you will not remember that, and I don't. I do have quizzes. Mostly they help you think, and mostly to help you pay attention. But they're to me and also because they projected I might have 60 students in the class, which right now it doesn't look like there will be. And so I had to adapt to the idea of having 60 students. And I might change, with your permission, might change the syllabus if we find out our class is going to be this size and do it a little bit differently. But the most important to me is not, in fact, you will know the questions before you see them on the final exam. And so everybody should do a good job with the final exam because you'll see them in quizzes, you'll hear them in class. I expect that most of you get an A in the final exam. That is going to be an objective test because you should already know the answers before, they'll be very concrete. The third most important thing this day and age, I think, is computers and computer skills. Because a lot of stuff that used to be a problem for us that distinguished whether we got an A or less was what we had to retain in our own memory. My stepson is a foundation student here, and he comes from Kazakhstan. And there he was at a special school for kids that were good at math and science. And in their school, they were not allowed to use calculators. And so he has all the high math formulas memorized. And so, you can, talk about calculus or whatever, he can, forget about the calculator. He's more at ease doing it by hand. That's kind of the Soviet system. Does it really even make sense anymore? That's kind of, basically a calculator is a small computer. It does for you what you don't no longer have to do for yourself. And so now, since we got here, because all of the classes here allow you to use a calculator, he's having to learn how to use a calculator for the first time. He's never used one before. And I would say that it makes more sense to use a calculator. When you're a professional sitting at your desk doing your engineering or whatever it is you're doing, you're going to have a calculator. You're not going to have to remember it all. You do have to remember when you apply certain mathematical approaches. But you don't have to, you're wasting your time if you're doing it all by hand. And so the same is true for many other things nowadays, like anything that somebody requires you to remember. Guess what? You have a computer. You can look it up. So a lot of the stuff that people are requiring us to memorize at a university or in public school, there's no reason to memorize it. It's really a joke. Most of our time should be spent on analyzing, applying, and so forth. That's what we should be doing at a university, not memorizing a bunch of stuff we don't have to memorize. Now, there are some things that you do have to remember. You do have to remember how to turn on the computer. You have to remember a few things. But most of the things you have to remember, we can all remember. It's not hard to remember. When we have to remember something and it's really important to us, for our day-to-day activities, the truth is you probably won't, when you go get a job, what they do at the job is probably going to be somewhat different than what you did in the university anyway. And so you may have new software, a new computer, a new system, new interaction with people. So what you learned at the university is perhaps only marginally, it's important to your career, but not as important, not as directly applicable as you might think it will be. And so when you go to your job for the first day, you're going to have to learn a whole bunch of new stuff. Remember that stuff. And you will remember it. You'll all remember it. And they will expect you to, maybe you'll forget something, like you'll forget your CEO's name. Maybe. But after a while, you're going to remember your CEO's name, right? There's lots of things you're going to have to remember, but you will remember them, because you'll be using them all the time. I have a nephew who has an IQ. As you know, IQ 100 is average. And if you have 130, that means you're really smart. If you have 70, that means not so much, right? My nephew has an IQ of about 70. And that's a kind of a guess, but judging what he's capable of doing, he's 40 years old. He does not know how to read. 40 years old, he doesn't know how to write, except maybe his name, just a few things. But unless you're a biology major, I don't think any of you can match my nephew when it comes to things about nature, especially animals in nature. Because he sits there all day and watches TV, and to him the most important thing is nature. He has lots of pets and things like that. That's his life. That's important to him. And with his 70 IQ, he remembers everything about nature, particularly about biology, about animals and stuff. And so, for example, Americans don't know geography very well, because they're very self-centered. To them, America is the only country, and the rest are just kind of whatever kind of idea. So Americans are very ignorant in geography. Nobody ever has a class in geography in America. So if you ask them where Malaysia was, they don't know. Yeah, and they especially didn't know where Kazakhstan was. Yeah, heaven forbid, that's only a 20-year-old country. Yes, nobody knows Kazakhstan. I would say, going back to Kazakhstan, probably 3% of Americans could tell you where Kazakhstan was. Very low number. So they don't know geography. And there was a game show. My mom was watching this game show with my 70 IQ nephew. And the question was, where is the Gobi Desert? And my mom thought she knew. And she thought it was basically in China. My nephew knew immediately. Oh, he said, oh, yeah, this is in China, a little bit of Mongolia, and they have these animals there, and it's like this and this. And it tells her all about the Gobi Desert because it related to nature. She later just out of fun, asked his older brother, who is a computer guru, where the Gobi Desert was. He thought it was in Africa. He didn't know anything about Gobi Desert. So, if something's important to you, even if you have a 70 IQ, you're going to remember it. And so, to me, the very lowest item, the very lowest thing involved in, that's of importance in education is memory. There are some things you have to remember. But our classes are far too much based on memorization. What I call memorization and regurgitation. Which is of very little value. We need to be much more hands-on, much more active, much more involved in our education so that it sticks, so that we are learning things that really matter. American education, despite many faults, tends to be a little bit more like that. And so the university I was at in Kazakhstan was founded by an American economist. He taught in America, but he was actually from Korea, so he's Korean-American. And almost all the big corporations hire from that university because they emphasize analysis and so forth, not memory, but analysis and communication and so forth. And I think that's important for any university, and even that university, KEMEP, is a long ways from being what it should be in my book, related to these things. Going back to attitude, what do I mean by that? Attitude involves more than just being positive. Although, just on that one question, just on positive attitude has a higher correlation with your success in life than a GPA does. Just that one element of attitude. Now, you start adding to that, besides being positive, having a work ethic, a positive work ethic, willing to work hard, willing to dedicate, to not give up, having curiosity, wanting to continue exploring. You add all that stuff, those sorts of things to it, and attitude overwhelms GPA, overwhelms it. And so that's far more important. Kind of related to that is this couple of questions here. Do you love what you're good at, or are you good at what you love? Which one is more important? First off, how many think is more important? Do you love, that you love what you're good at? How many think that's more important? How many of you think that it's more important is that you're good at what you love? That's more true. I think they both have truth to them. It's hard to separate them. But I'll tell you this, what I'm doing now was my weakest area in public school. I was kind of a math genius. In the nationalized test, and when I was in 8th grade, I was at 99 2/3 of the entire population, the top 1/3 of everybody who took that test. But I decided math was not my future, that I wanted to share ideas and ideals. I thought communication was more important, and that was my weakest area. But that's what I chose to do because I loved it, and I loved what I wanted to accomplish with it. I felt a mission in life to pursue communications, I did not feel a mission in life to pursue math and science. Although I still am very fond of them. I still have, when I abandoned math for about 10 years before I went back to my graduate program and had to use a lot of statistics, and I was number one in the class in using statistics, even though I had abandoned math for, like I say, 10 years or more. But so I was naturally good at it, but that's not what I wanted to pursue in life. And so, to me, you become good at what you love. In the long run, that's more important to me. That ultimately, if you love something, you will become good at it. You may not be at first. Like I was not good in communications at first. First time I gave a public speech, I nearly literally fainted on the floor. I gave my speech and I went back and my knees were buckling. I was so scared. I was not good at that. I was very shy, and it took a lot of courage to become good at it. If I'm good at it yet, I don't know. But anyway, so you can become good at what you're weak at now can become your strength if you love it and if you work at it. In that sense, by the way, if some of you are in a major that you don't like because your parents told you you had to, you might want to have them talk to me. That's a really bad decision in this day and age. Because once you graduate, you will not excel in your career. Because you won't be a lifelong learner. You don't want to learn anymore. You graduated. You got your degree. You never liked it. And all this new stuff happening all the time. This world is changing so rapidly. Like I said, there's revolution after revolution of paradigms and ideas. New knowledge is being created every day to where they say that, before you graduate, what you learned as a freshman is outdated by the time you graduate. So if you graduate in an area that you don't like, in 4 years, you're going to know nothing, basically. Everything you learn, a lot of what you learned is going to be irrelevant. By the time you're 8 years, 12 years, 16 years out of your major, you are not going to be very successful because you hate what you had to graduate in. It's just going to be very hard. You're going to be a very average at best employee if you don't love what you're doing. Whereas somebody who got a lot lower grades than you and loved the subject, they will keep learning and learning and learning and make you look stupid by the time you're done with your career. So I don't want to counter parents, but time after time after time, I've encountered students who were pushed into a major they did not want to be in. And I'm just telling you, in this day and age especially, where in a knowledge-based world, a knowledge-based economy like we have now, the worst thing you do is go into a career that you hate. That's the worst thing you can do, because you will not do well at it. You have to be lifelong learners to continue to be at the cutting edge of your career. You have to be. Just one example, and at TMEP at the previous university, a girl decided just because she enjoyed writing, she took one of my classes, but her parents had made her major in economics. She hated economics, but she loved writing. She had been writing since she was a child, doing poetry and all sorts of stuff. And she took my class, and she came into my class very negative. Her attitude was very negative, talking about attitude. She was very sad. And I didn't quite, in fact, she skipped most of my classes because she was she skipped most of her classes altogether at the university. I could have flunked her very easily. But in the last couple of weeks, she came back and said, I need to pass this class. Can I make up my work? So I gave her some very hard assignments, writing assignments, reporting assignments, going to have to go talk to people, interview people to write multi-page news stories. And I thought she would fail because she was so negative coming into it. I thought maybe she was on drugs. I didn't know what was going on in her head. But she had skipped all the classes. She had skipped most of my lectures. I gave her like a 15-minute explanation of how she should be doing the assignment because she had skipped all the classes. So I thought for sure she was going to fail. She came back with some of the best writing I've ever had, ever. I was shocked. In fact, at first I thought she was cheating. But then the more I read, I realized she couldn't cheat because she was writing stories about real people. She interviewed real people. She had to put it together herself. There's nobody else who could do it for her. And so I sat down with her. What the world is going on with you? Why, first off, why were you missing class? Secondly, how are you such a good writer? You're not a major, you're not a journalism major, you're an economics major, and you did all this in the last 2 weeks of class. What in the world is going on in your life? And that's what she told me. That her parents had forced her into economics, and she was just hated life, in essence. She was doing stuff she didn't want to do. And so I said, look you are a natural writer. You're one of the best writers I've ever seen in a college classroom. I said, once you graduate, you should be looking for a writing job. And so I gave her a little bit more help. I gave her a lot of positive feedback to what she was doing. She graduated, bam. She asked me for a letter of recommendation. She had a job at a magazine immediately. And doing very well as a journalist, even though she only had one class and she only came to class about 2 weeks out of the semester. And again, I could have easily flunked her for non-participation. But I didn't, because I wanted her to be positive. I wanted her to achieve success in life by her vision, not her parents' vision. So she's now a successful journalist with 2 weeks of study, basically. Going back to attitude. Attitude, I think, is everything. Attitude is a sense of mission. Attitude leads to passion. Attitude certainly leads to a positive attitude. It leads to a strong work ethic. And in fact, I grew up on a farm. And as a family farm, we had a big irrigated farm. All the irrigation had to be changed all the time. We had to dig, ditches, culverts to make the water run down the culverts. We had to change big irrigation pipes. And by the time I was 6 years old, I was working longer hours than most adults out in the fields and under hot weather in the deserts of eastern Washington. I hated that. That was not my idea of a good life by any means. I did learn how to work hard. But more importantly, when I did get to do what I wanted to do, it was not hard to have a good work ethic in journalism because it was not work to me. Since I left the farm, I don't think I worked a day in my life. I've just done stuff I wanted to do. And so I say you have to have a strong work ethic, and you do. I mean, you have to be really successful. You have to be willing to put in more hours than somebody else. But if you really are passionate about what you do, then it's not work. That's just your excuse for working. It's a job, and so that's your excuse for working, that you tell your spouse or whatever, oh, I have to work. But you really want to be at work because it's not work to you. And as I said, you'll be involved in lifelong learning because you have a passion for it. You want to understand what's going on. You want to be at the cutting edge of understanding. So positive attitude is a lot more, or the type of attitude that I'm encouraging you to have is a lot more than just being positive. That's part of it. Certainly be positive. But it involves much more. Be passionate. And that, of course, goes back to what is it that you're doing? Have you made the right choices at this point? I don't want to cause a rebellion here if your parents are all telling you to you major in something you don't like, but frankly, at some point, you will be on your own. At some point, like this economics student that I had, you'll be able to make your own choices. Maybe you can't, don't feel like you can now. But I'm telling you that if you don't love what you do, it's going to be very hard to be successful. Very hard. Then that work ethic really becomes burdensome. How many of you are already acquainted with Moodle, our e-learning system? How many already are involved with that? Let me just introduce those of you that are not. Let me introduce you to that real quickly, because that's you need to know how to access it. You need to know how to enroll into this the online portion of this class. this is not the correct password for this class. This is section 2 or group 2, and so your password would be Success 2017 B, not A, B. In this class, it would be B. You go to our regular website, Xiamen University's opening website. You go up to Library. You click on that. That'll take you to the library services. And right here, it may be hard for you to see, it says Moodle. That's a brand name of a free e-learning system that a lot of universities use. It's probably the most used system in the world. Excuse me. A lot of the wealthier universities in America use Blackboard, and they kind of feel stuck at it. I was the distance learning coordinator at the previous university, and Blackboard came to give us their pitch, and they wanted to charge $100,000 a year for using the Blackboard system, whereas Moodle is free, and we already had it installed. It's not that different, so we stayed with Moodle there, and that's what we're using here at Xiamen, is the Moodle system. It's a learning management system. That's kind of what the page will look like. Blowing it up, you'll see the link to the Moodle site, to the learning management site. As it explains here, you use your regular campus ID and your password, the same information you use for getting your email and stuff like that, you use to get into Moodle. This mixes what you need and what lecturers need. You'll need an enrollment key. And as I said, this is the wrong key. So it'd be Success 2017 B, because this is group 2. I thought I changed that, but I guess I didn't. Anyway, you will then, if you click that link here, up here, that will take you to the Moodle site. I'm pointing at the login, but actually before you go to login, if you scroll down, you will see Moodle Quick Guide, and that will give you some information about how to use Moodle. A lot of it is very intuitive anyway. It's quite intuitive. And you'll be able to ask me or others. If the most important thing is if you get confused and you don't know how to access a quiz, you don't know how to upload an assignment or something, please ask me, or ask somebody in IT. It's not that hard, but do not get behind because you don't understand. I had a stepson who went to my previous university, and he basically, he didn't flunk because he had to withdraw, but he went all the way almost halfway through the course, the semester, before he confessed to his instructor he didn't know how to access all the stuff on Moodle. And everything was to be done on Moodle. So he basically had to withdraw from the class. He wasted, can't remember how much the class cost, was over $1,000 that he just flushed down the toilet. You can imagine how happy I was about that. Because he didn't ask. So the stupidest thing you can do is don't ask when you have a question. That's the stupidest thing. So if you have a question about this or anything that is that is prohibiting you from excelling, ask. I'm a nice guy. I don't bite people's head off. I'm easy to get along with. Too easy sometimes. So ask. Okay? Please ask. So I'm going to click into that. That'll get you into a tutorial. And you'll see this at start, but keep scrolling down. This is more or less repeats what you already saw. Down here you have Moodle Quick Start for students, and it includes a video on how to enroll yourself into the online portion of the course. So do that. It may have, if you keep scrolling down, it might have some other hints, but basically once you get enrolled and once you know how to get there, if it's not obvious to you, then ask, and it'll take about 1 second to explain it to you. It's a pretty easy system to use. So anyway, when you go back to the real Moodle site and click on your course, the video will show you how to basically hit Enroll Me. because it won't let you go to the Moodle site until you've enrolled. So once you click on the Success Strategies Group 2, it will take you to this site, and you use the enrollment key, Success 2017 BBB, to enroll in this class. And so again, you go sign in now using your regular ID and password, and you get into the system, and you find it. This should be come right up to where your classes are being shown. But if you haven't been enrolled in a class, you won't see anything. So you go to the front page where I showed you before, and you'll scroll down and you'll learn how to do it. But you need to find the course in your list and use the enrollment key to get in. So it's not hard. The main textbook of this class is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Anybody familiar with that book? 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? It is considered one of the most important books in business management, but it's much more than a business management course or a business management book. The book has been purchased by 25 million people or more, probably by now far more than that, because this is an old slide, in 40 different languages. It certainly, I'm sure it's in not just available here in this country in English, but in other languages as well. The author, Stephen Covey, was named by one of the top magazines in America, Time magazine, as one of the 25 most influential Americans. Forbes magazine, another top magazine, called his book, 7 Habits, one of the top 10 most influential management books ever written. The survey of Chief Executive magazine recognized 7 Habits as one of the 2 most influential books of the 20th century. Stephen Covey has been here before. He's now dead. He was killed he was riding his bicycle. One of the things that Stephen Covey believes in is that you have to keep yourself strong in every sense, mentally, morally, physically, socially. And so he was out riding his bicycle to keep himself physically strong. He's about 70, he's over 70. I think he's getting close to 80 years old, but he was hit by a car and killed. Anyway, his book lives on, so to speak. We'll be watching some videos of him that I've downloaded from YouTube to help you get a sense of his personality. He can express his ideas better than I can. So we'll be watching videos, but we also have access to an abridged version of his book, so you can read it as well and understand it. One of the things that it's important for you to understand in your success at college is to understand this. This was a survey. This is from a survey by a major organization on behalf of many of the UK universities. They asked executives, on what basis do you hire somebody? Why do you hire one person other than somebody else? And these are the top things they noted, the top 10 things. And the ones by star, with the stars by them, are things that Stephen Covey addresses in his book. So out of the top 10 things, 7 of them are addressed, and Stephen Covey's book will help you become stronger in those areas. Very few of the other classes will help you in these things. But Stephen Covey will, and hopefully other things we discuss here in this class, will help you become stronger in all of these 7 areas. One thing you notice is almost none of it has to do with your major. Almost none of it. Because when they come in and interview you, they're assuming that you have basic skills in your major. So now they're interviewing you and they want to see, number 1, how do you communicate? So you're in an interview. Or you've written them a cover letter. You've sent them your CV. How did you communicate with them? They may not even look at your GPA. If you leave it off your CV, they may not care. Because what they really want, your ability to communicate is more important, as my former CEO said, than your actual basic skills in your major. Now that's important. It's a foundation for doing your job. There's no question about that. But when it comes to hiring you, it's your ability to communicate that will make the difference. When it comes to being promoted in the future, your ability to communicate will be more important to your getting promoted than your skills in your major. Second one, your team working skills becomes very important. Your integrity. And that, Covey talks a lot about integrity and personality and character. He thinks that's very pivotal because he thinks it relates to the title, the 7 habits of highly effective people. What are your habits? Habits are things that you do automatically, that you don't have to think about. You do them automatically. And so if you are duplicitous, if you're double-minded, if you say one thing and you do something else, that's not a habit. I mean, well, that's a habit. Yeah, that's a habit of being duplicitous. But it's not a good habit. So you may pretend that you're one thing, but you're not naturally doing that one thing, something positive, because you're really lying about it. So you may try to come across that you have this good trait in your interview, but over a period of time, they'll be able to tell whether that's really you or whether that was a front, whether that was a disguise, so to speak. And so it'll be particularly important for you being promoted whether you are what you say you are. And so integrity suggests oneness. It suggests strength in unity. And when you pretend to be one thing and you really are something else, that's the opposite of integrity. So integrity is important to them. Confidence. Confidence is an amazing thing. I was an editor at a daily newspaper, and there was this one editor who had confidence, incomparable confidence. Confidence far stronger than his capability. But he was given special assignments and stuff only because he was confident. In fact, to me, his confidence was to the degree of being arrogant. He would rewrite a lot of the stories that our professional reporters were writing. Because to him, if they didn't write it the way he wanted it written, then it wasn't good enough. To me, every writer has their own style. And so I might change a paragraph or two, but I would not rewrite a professional reporter's story. Hardly ever, because if he's a professional writer, if he's a professional reporter, he should know his job. Otherwise, he should be fired. And so we didn't have any reporters I thought should be fired. And therefore, I did not rewrite their work. I rewrote pieces of it sometimes, make it clear, so forth. That was my job as an editor. But I was not so arrogant to think that my way of writing was the only way of writing, the only true way of writing. And this other guy was so confident in his writing that he would totally rewrite reporters' work. I thought, to me, that was just arrogance. But he still was given important assignments based on his arrogance, basically, which was amazing to me. Confidence can go a long ways. I had a stepson who got himself in trouble because one of the reasons why he's an ex-stepson is that his mother was not a very ethical person. She was not what she seemed to be when I married her. One problem with marriage is that you don't know what a person's really like till after you've married them. And 4 of my 5 stepkids actually committed felonies while we were married. So that's one of the main reasons why we're no longer married. But one of the kids who committed a felony was a very mediocre student, but his level of confidence was such that by the time he was 20 years old, he was already the manager of a shoe store in a major mall because he was confident, which was amazing to me because he was actually taking special education courses in high school because his skills in a scholastic setting were very worse than mediocre. But he was confident. He became a manager, and then he started stealing inventory, and so he got fired as a manager, but which was stupid. So there's some things, again, integrity needs to come into play. But his confidence got him a big job by the time he was 20, that he destroyed. Planning organizational skills is part of the book, The 7 Habits. Again, character and personality, analysis, decision-making. All these things are part of the 7 habits, which is why presidents have used Stephen Covey as their consultants. Prime ministers have used them as their consultants. Executives, top executives have used them as his consultants. In fact, if you go to Amazon and click into this on Amazon, you'll see about 6 pages of well-known people who said how wonderful this book was. You'll recognize almost all of them, their names, because he was number 1 in the world in business management for a long time. When he came to Kazakhstan, he was actually, my first 2 degrees were from Brigham Young University, and he was a professor at Brigham Young, and when he wrote his book, he was a professor there. And Brigham Young is a religious university, and so he and I share the same religion. And so he came to Almaty, Kazakhstan for the business executives that brought him there. They each paid $3,000 apiece to spend 1 day with him. 1 day as a group. So as in their seminar, the business executives paid $3,000 apiece to have Stephen Covey come and spend the day to teach them how to be more effective executives. That's how good he is. He came to our church and gave us pretty much the same lesson free. So that was nice. So again, this book covers all those sorts of things, and so that will be our textbook, but it won't be the only thing we're talking about. We'll be talking about a lot of other concepts as well. For example, just some examples. We'll talk, how many of you have heard of Robert Kiyosaki? Probably not. One of my students in yesterday's class had heard of him. I was surprised. He knew him rather well. He wrote a bestseller called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And his book is about investing. Because his dad was basically me. His dad had a PhD. He'd written books. He was extremely well thought of to the degree that he became the superintendent of education in the state of Hawaii in America. So he was a very highly esteemed educator. Had achieved a lot. His lifetime, he got paid well for what he did. But when he died, he was worth almost nothing. He basically left his house, to his family. He had no saving, no real investments in anything. And so in essence, he died poor, relatively. His friend's dad was not a college graduate, I don't think, but he was an investor, especially an investor in real estate. And so we're not going to spend a lot of time with Robert Kiyosaki, but I want you to understand his perspective. We're talking about paradigms, how to see the world in a different way. And he's saying if you have a job, you're going to die broke. That you should not have, that your best way of becoming successful is to not have a job, but to be an investor and to do things yourself. Again, I don't go along with that totally, although right now I'm looking at some real estate investments myself because of Robert Kiyosaki. I probably would have invested my money in some other direction, but the more I thought about it, the more I think he's right about going after real estate rather than something else. So he has influenced me. My wife watches all of his videos on YouTube and stuff, so she influences me too. But so we're looking at some real estate investments now because of Robert Kiyosaki. Another one is a guy named Clayton Christensen. The universities in the UK, every 2 years, they vote who is the most influential business mind in the world. Who has the most influence in the world of business in the world. And they, for 2 sequences in a row, so over a year of 4 years, number 1 person in the world was a guy named Clayton Christensen, a Harvard professor. And he's totally turned business theory on its head. If you've ever heard of the idea of disruptive innovation, that's Clayton Christensen. If you hear people say, they're really going to disrupt that company, that's Clayton Christensen making a new use of the word disrupt. Because that's what his book and his studies have been about. How he had already become a multimillionaire when he went back to get his doctorate degree. And he went back to get his doctorate degree at Harvard with one main question in mind. He already knew the question before he started his research. And that question was, how is it possible for small startup companies to overcome monopolies? And he already knew in his mind a lot of examples of that. A big company that had all the power, all the money, all the experts they could buy, and some little startup company came and disrupted them, again, using his word. They overthrew the giant. How does David slay Goliath in the world of business? And so he was very interested in that. And what he found is that a lot of the reasons why is because the executives of the monopolies listened to their professors. They actually did what their professors told them to do, and it destroyed their company in some cases. Destroyed it totally in some cases and just diminished it greatly in other cases because they did what the professors told them to do. And so he has principles and ideas that are totally, like I say, totally different paradigm of business thinking, but it's also overlaps into other areas. Because again, it's kind of this idea of a revolution. Clayton Christensen has started a revolution in thinking. And so he has done research in education. He's done research in how you might say a revolution in education, a revolution in media, news media, revolution in the healthcare industry. He's looked at the revolution and how things are changing in everything. And so his principles are valuable in whatever your major is. I think you'll find them of value. So I want to spend some time with Clayton Christensen. I was, before I came here, I had a consulting contract with the investment corporation of the National Bank of Kazakhstan. This investment corporation was in charge of investing about $50 billion, none of it in Kazakhstan. They were supposed to go invest the $50 billion of oil money in other countries, particularly in America. And they had never heard of Clayton Christensen before. Now, my job was actually to teach them how to communicate better. But to communicate better, you have to have interesting ideas. And so one of the questions the CEO asked me, because that was my main target, the main person I was supposed to help, because he was doing national speeches internationally and meeting with investors and meeting with companies in America and other places. So how do I, not only how do I communicate better, what do I communicate about? What would be interesting to other people? So I was teaching them interesting ideas, including the ideas of Clayton Christensen. And we ended up spending many, many hours talking about Clayton Christensen because here these all had degrees, all had at least master's degrees in finance or related areas, MBAs, and none of them had heard of Clayton Christensen, who is totally overthrowing the entire paradigm of how to be an executive, a business executive. So we will talk about Clayton Christensen and how he's revolutionizing business management. Lots of other people like Zig Ziglar, people that are experts in sales. And you say, well, I'm not going to be in sales. All of you are going to be in salespeople. In your lifetime, you're all going to be salespeople. Not for a profession, maybe, but when you go for a job, you have to sell yourself. When you have an idea at your work, you have to sell your idea. When you want to get married, you've got to sell yourself to your potential spouse and to her father, probably. You're going to be selling yourself throughout your life. You will be a salesperson. Even if you're an engineer, even if you're a scientist, the people who have led revolutions have been good salespeople. They've had to be good salespeople. You don't lead a revolution in science without being a good salesperson. You have to be a good salesperson because you have to convince a lot of people to agree with you. That sells. That sells probably at its finest is to be a scientist that leads a revolution. When you write a paper, if you're a scientist, you write a paper, in essence, you have to take a salesman approach to getting your paper published. So you will be salespeople whether you know it or not. You will be salespeople, and we are going to listen to some of the videos and talk about some of the principles of sales. How do you sell your ideas? Whether it's literal sales in a profession or not. The question of what is success and what is happiness. Are the two the same? What do you think? What is success? And is it compatible with happiness? Are they the same or are they different? Is they different? So what's your definition of success then? What's success? What's success? What do you think? You guys can't be able to chat in this class. You have to talk. You think the same kind of success? So success in your life will be if you achieve happiness. That's a good perspective. There are people who have achieved success. Actually, a survey of millennials, people more or less your age, older, maybe younger, a survey of millennials shows that for them, success relates very strongly to fame and fortune. That's success. But that some of the people who have achieved the most fame and fortune are people in Hollywood. You haven't noticed how many have died of drug overdoses or even suicide? Robin Williams recently killed himself. When I was younger, there was a famous actor, comedian named John Belushi, very much like Robin Williams, very outlandish, very famous, very popular in movies. You can probably go back and do it. I think, he was part of Ghostbusters, the original Ghostbusters. If you ever watched the original Ghostbusters movie, very, very famous, very, very rich. I didn't know him directly, but I knew one of the editors at Rolling Stone magazine, which basically focuses on entertainment. And this writer for Rolling Stone happened to come to my house on the day that John Belushi died of a drug overdose. And he was very shaken up because he had known John quite well. And he was disturbed, and he said, when he last talked to Belushi, Belushi said, I hate my life. Here he had all the fame and fortune you could possibly want, that I hate my life. I don't have control of my own life. And so he escaped to drugs and ultimately died of drugs. Some of the people who gain the most fame and most fortune in the world, they get there and they say, is this all there is? And so I think the answer of happiness and success is a very good answer. Because if you're not happy when you get where you went, where you wanted to go, there's a problem. And that actually kind of relates to something that Stephen Covey teaches. He gives this example. He says, it's under the habit he calls, begin with the end in mind is what he calls it. Begin with the end in mind, his second habit. And his example is you're out in a jungle, out here in the jungles of Malaysia or someplace, and you're helping build a road through the jungles. And so you're chopping down trees, you're using a machete to cut down the undergrowth, and you're making good progress. You're gone a long ways and everything. And finally, somebody climbs up on a tree and he looks out across the jungle and he yells down, "We're going in the wrong direction." And the people down below say, "Yeah, but we're making progress." Well, you can make progress in life and be going in the wrong direction. And what are you going to think when you finally get to the end of the road, so to speak? Well, you made progress. You never went where you wanted to go. And so beginning with the end in mind is one of the most important principles of Stephen Covey, to figure out where you're going. And so he's one you may have heard people, they talk about mission statements. Universities frequently have mission statements. That comes from Stephen Covey. He pushed the idea of mission statements and said basically you as an individual should have a mission statement. You as an individual basically should know where you're going, what your life is all about. Otherwise, you're not going to get there. You're gonna go and wander around through your life, and ultimately you're not going to get where you want to go because you didn't know where you wanted to go. You didn't set a mission statement. You didn't decide what your life was all about. And therefore, you're out here in the jungle making progress, but you end up where you didn't want to go. So success and happiness should be the same. There was I'm going to just end with a quick video. Let me see here. I'm going to turn that off. And this person explains why sometimes the pursuit of happiness leads to unhappiness. Pursuit of happiness leads to unhappiness. And so we'll end with this. We'll watch a part of some of your main homework. By the way, try to get onto Moodle. And I'm going to be posting today some additional videos for you to watch, and that's your homework before next week is to watch videos. And I may also, no, I won't give you a reading assignment yet. So yeah, that's your only homework for the next week is to watch videos. So I'll post a bunch of videos onto the Moodle site for you to watch for our first week before next class. Also go through, I haven't taken time to go through the syllabus, partly because I didn't have it ready yesterday, and so I will go back to the syllabus, but it's there, it's now posted on Moodle, so you can review the syllabus on your own, see if you're comfortable with it. If you have questions, we will definitely talk about the syllabus in the next class. But to end this class, it may go a little bit beyond the end of the class, but not much, and you can go if you need to. But it's an interesting video, and I'm just going to go ahead and turn that on now, if I can find it. Where is it?
Feeling fulfilled, I felt anxious and adrift. And I wasn't alone. My friends, they struggled with this too. Eventually, I decided to go to graduate school for positive psychology to learn what truly makes people happy. But what I discovered there changed my life. The data showed that chasing happiness can make people unhappy. And what really struck me was this. The suicide rate has been rising around the world, and it recently reached a 30-year high in America. Even though life is getting objectively better by nearly every conceivable standard, more people feel hopeless, depressed, and alone. There's an emptiness gnawing away at people, and you don't have to be clinically depressed to feel it. Sooner or later, I think we all wonder, is this all there is? And according to the research, what predicts this despair is not a lack of happiness. It's a lack of something else, a lack of having meaning in life. But that raised some questions for me. Is there more to life than being happy? And what's the difference between being happy and having meaning in life? Many psychologists define happiness as a state of comfort and ease, feeling good in the moment. Meaning, though, is deeper. The renowned psychologist Martin Seligman says meaning comes from belonging to and serving something beyond yourself, and from developing the best within you. Our culture is obsessed with happiness, but I came to see that seeking meaning is the more fulfilling path. And the studies showed that people who have meaning in life, they're more resilient, they do better in school and at work, and they even live longer. So this all made me wonder, how can we each live more meaningfully? To find out, I spent 5 years interviewing hundreds of people and reading through thousands of pages of psychology, neuroscience, and philosophy. Bringing it all together, I found that there are what I call 4 pillars of a meaningful life. and we can each create lives of meaning by building some or all of these pillars in our lives. The first pillar is belonging. Belonging comes from being in relationships where you're valued for who you are intrinsically and where you value others as well. But some groups and relationships deliver a cheap form of belonging. You're valued for what you believe, for who you hate, not for who you are. True belonging springs from love. It lives in moments among individuals, and it's a choice. You can choose to cultivate belonging with others. Here's an example. Each morning, my friend Jonathan buys a newspaper from the same street vendor in New York. They don't just conduct a transaction, though. They take a moment to slow down, talk, and treat each other like humans. But one time, Jonathan didn't have the right change, and the vendor said, "Don't worry about it." But Jonathan insisted on paying. So he went to the store and bought something he didn't need to make change. But when he gave the money to the vendor drew back. He was hurt. He was trying to do something kind, but Jonathan had rejected him. I think we all reject people in small ways like this without realizing it. I do. I'll walk by someone I know and barely acknowledge them. I'll check my phone when someone's talking to me. These acts devalue others. They make them feel invisible and unworthy. But when you lead with love, you create a bond that lifts each of you up. For many people, belonging is the most essential source of meaning, those bonds to family and friends. For others, the key to meaning is the second pillar, purpose. Now, finding your purpose is not the same thing as finding that job that makes you happy. Purpose is less about what you want than about what you give. A hospital custodian told me her purpose is healing sick people. Many parents tell me, my purpose is raising my children. The key to purpose is using your strengths to serve others. Of course, for many of us, that happens through work. That's how we contribute and feel needed. But that also means that issues like disengagement at work, unemployment, low labor force participation, these aren't just economic problems, they're existential ones too. Without something worthwhile to do, people flounder. Of course, you don't have to find purpose at work, but purpose gives you something to live for, some why that drives you forward. The third pillar of meaning is also about stepping beyond yourself, but in a completely different way. Transcendence. Transcendent states are those rare moments when you're lifted above the hustle and bustle of daily life. Your sense of self fades away, and you feel connected to a higher reality. For one person I talked to, transcendence came from seeing art. For another person, it was at church. For me, I'm a writer, and it happens through writing. Sometimes I get so in the zone that I lose all sense of time and place. And these transcendent experiences can change you. One study had students look up at 200 feet tall eucalyptus trees for 1 minute. But afterwards, they felt less self-centered, and they even behaved more generously when given the chance to help someone. Belonging, purpose, transcendence. Now, the fourth pillar of meaning, I found, tends to surprise people. The fourth pillar is storytelling, the story you tell yourself about yourself. Creating a narrative from the events of your life brings clarity. It helps you understand how you became you. But we don't always realize that we're the authors of our stories and can change the way we're telling them. Your life isn't just a list of events. You can edit, interpret, and retell your story even as you're constrained by the facts. I met a young man named Emeka who'd been paralyzed playing football. After his injury, Emeka told himself, "My life was great playing football, but now, look at me." People who tell stories like this, "My life was good, now it's bad," they tend to be more anxious and depressed. And that was Emeka for a while. But with time, he started to weave a different story. His new story was, "Before my injury, my life was purposeless. I partied a lot and was a pretty selfish guy. But my injury made me realize I could be a better man." That edit to his story changed Emeka's life. After telling the new story to himself, Emeka started mentoring kids, and he discovered what his purpose was: serving others. The psychologist Dan McAdams calls this a redemptive story, where the bad is redeemed by the good. People leading meaningful lives, he's found, they tend to tell stories about their lives defined by redemption, growth, and love. But what makes people change their stories? Some people get help from a therapist, but you can do it on your own too, just by reflecting on your life thoughtfully. How your defining experiences shaped you, what you lost, what you gained. That's what Emeka did. You won't change your story overnight. It could take years and be painful. After all, we've all suffered and we all struggle. But embracing those painful memories can lead to new insights and wisdom, to finding that good that sustains you. Belonging, purpose, transcendence, storytelling. Those are the 4 pillars of meaning. When I was younger, I was lucky enough to be surrounded by all of the pillars. My parents ran a Sufi meeting house from our home in Montreal. Sufism is a spiritual practice associated with the whirling dervishes and the poet Rumi. Twice a week, Sufis would come to our home to meditate, drink Persian tea, and share stories. Their practice also involved serving all of creation through small acts of love, which meant being kind even when people wronged you. But it gave them a purpose: to rein in the ego. Eventually, I left home for college, and without the daily grounding of Sufism in my life, I felt unmoored, and I started searching for those things that make life worth living. That's what set me on this journey. Looking back, I now realize that the Sufi house had a real culture of meaning. The pillars were part of the architecture, and the presence of the pillars helped us all live more deeply. Of course, the same principle applies in other strong communities as well, good ones and bad ones. Gangs, cults, these are cultures of meaning that use the pillars and give people something to live and die for. But that's exactly why we as a society must offer better alternatives. We need to build these pillars within our families and our institutions to help people become their best selves. But living a meaningful life takes work. It's an ongoing process. As each day goes by, we're constantly creating our lives, adding to our story. And sometimes we can get off track. Whenever that happens to me, I remember a powerful experience I had with my father. Several months after I graduated from college, my dad had a massive heart attack that should have killed him. He survived, and when I asked him what was going through his mind as he faced death, he said all he could think about was needing to live so he could be there for my brother and me, and this gave him the will to fight for life. When he went under anesthesia for emergency surgery, instead of counting backwards from 10, he repeated our names like a mantra. He wanted our names to be the last words he spoke on earth if he died. My dad is a carpenter and a Sufi. It's a humble life, but a good life. Lying there facing death, he had a reason to live: love. His sense of belonging within his family, his purpose as a dad, his transcendent meditation repeating our names, these, he says, are the reasons why he survived. That's the story he tells himself. That's the power of meaning. Happiness comes and goes, but when life is really good and when things are really bad, having meaning gives you something to hold on to. Thank you.
Well, just to, I would like you to think about the 4 pillars. I've actually watched this, I think, 4 times, and I actually got more out of this talk this time than I ever have before. But I concentrate a little more on the 4 pillars you were talking about. One thing that you'll be doing in this class will be creating your own story, in a sense. The writing you'll do is reflective writing. It's about you. It's about what your meaning of life is and your purpose in life is and how to apply the principles we talk about in the class in your own lives. So in a very real sense, your writing in this class will be fulfilling one of the 4 pillars that she is talking about, is writing your story. What is your story? What is your purpose? And so I want to talk about that a little bit in the next class. I'm not sure this will have recorded very well. In my last class, it did not record very well as a video inside a video, so to speak. And I'm not sure. I need to figure out how to do that better. But I will put this on the Moodle site separately. And I may just totally even edit it out of the video I'm making, and just let you, if you want to watch it again as a separate video, so you'll get better quality from it. So we'll be talking about her ideas of the 4 pillars and what leads to meaning in life, and how that relates to success. As I said, from her perspective, success may actually lead to lack of success or a sense of failure, even if you don't have meaning as well. And I think that's what happened to those movie stars and stuff, why they escaped to drugs and why they committed suicide. When it all got down to it, they had fame and fortune. They didn't have meaning. They didn't have purpose. And without that, they didn't care about life. And that's the biggest failure of all, ultimately. Thank you. We'll see you next week.